This is Ezekiel Drews, host of Podcast, A Star Wars Story. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey, it's Baxter Colburn here from Public House Media. Did you know that we just added a store here at Public House Media? No, I'm not talking about a grocery store where you can go buy apples or bananas or peanut butter, which are all fantastic, especially when peanut butter's on all of those. Anyway, we've added a store here at Public House Media so you can not only come and represent your favorite podcast network, but also represent your favorite shows as well, too. Just go over to thephmedia.com and look in the top right corner where you'll see the button that says Store. Click on that and you can search through all of our great products. Or if you go to our Facebook page, Public House Media, you can see on the left-hand side a tab that says Store. All of our products are listed there as well too. It's the new Public House Media store. You don't want to miss it. It is fantastic. Buy some of that great swag to support your favorite shows and to support Public House Media. Check it out today.
Tiana Vanderhei here, host of the Refined Redhead podcast on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast. Once you're done with this episode, you should definitely come check out my show, the Refined Redhead podcast, where we talk to real people about relevant information in hopes of inspiring you to chase after whatever dreams you've set out to accomplish, persevering through whatever obstacles are in your way. A new show comes out bi-weekly every Tuesday, so don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of the Refined Redhead podcast. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppie. Find out more about me at How to Write Good. No, not at howtowritegood.com. At danielpoppie.com. If you enjoy this podcast, please check it out on Facebook. Check out the website. Like and share stuff as it comes up. That's a big help to me. I do not have a show map. I usually have something to at least keep me on the path I'm trying to go. But I don't today. And the reason why I don't is because I recorded this episode already. And after I got done recording the episode, I was checking back because I needed to upload it, and it was gone. It was just gone. So I'm recording this episode, and I'm doing it off the cuff. And everyone knows that doing things off the cuff is really, really excellent, and everyone should pretty much not prepare for anything. That's how I think. Yeah, seriously, just not prepare for anything. You should just make it up as you go. Wing it, as it were. So, if you enjoy How to Write Good, check out Public House Media. How to Write Good would not be here if it were not for Public House Media. So check them out on Facebook. Like their stuff. There's got to be a show that you would enjoy if you don't like this one. And if you don't like anything, I mean, nobody can please you. You're just an awful person. And you know who who you are, who I'm talking to. Check out Public House Media on their webpage. Do people use that term anymore? I think it's just gone to the wayside. I lost my word of the week. See, I'm not very prepared. Their webpage is thephmedia.com. If you want to, you can get How to Write Good swag. Now, I'm getting it because it's awesome. You should get it because it will increase the value of your life about 73.2%. I think that's what the study said. And you'll like it. You'll think it's great. You'll think it's the best stuff you're going to get. I wish there was a baseball cap. I need a baseball cap. Our word of the week is abysm. This is a dumb word. I don't like this word. If you listened, never mind. That was the show I recorded that disappeared. I'm going to start commenting on the words that are the word of the week. Abysm is a dumb word. And the reason why it's a dumb word is because it means abyss. And there's no reason we need to have two words that mean abyss. Now, abysm may be better to have. Maybe we should have abysm because it connects better to abysmal. But we don't need both of them. Abysm might actually... abysm might have a better feel to it, but the fact that there's two words that are the same length, they have one letter that varies, because the M at the end, it's ABYSM instead of the double S at the end. There's no point in having it. It's a stupid word. So I'm sharing it with you so you can be aware. And we all know that you've only got about 5 words in your vocabulary, and by you, I mean me. So let's try that. So we're going to jump into our accidental essence right away. Before we do, I've been reading a lot about writing. I don't know if I mentioned this in the one I deleted, but I mentioned this, and I'm probably going to talk about this in another podcast episode because I want, as I said before, I want to make a video series partly for myself so I can walk myself through what it actually takes to go from very basic writing to very complex writing. And I want to, because I'm also a teacher, so I need to know how to get someone else to understand what writing is. So I'm on this never-ending quest to figure out what good writing is and have a good explanation for it and be able to teach it to someone else. So I'm reading books about writing. I'm reading a book by Steven Pinker. I've actually got it in my hands right now, if you can imagine that. My hands are very sticky. It's very warm where I'm moving right now. I live in Wisconsin, and one week we have snow, and it's 30 degrees. And the next week it's 77 degrees. Side note, Wisconsin, like you people who, if there's any of you who live in warmer climates, the Wisconsin climate varies ridiculously. We have, if you go even farther north, it varies even more, I'm sure. But like in the winter, it gets down to, at the lowest, I'm going to say the lowest is like -30. -20 is a good ballpark area. That's Fahrenheit. If you use Celsius, just do the conversion. So -20 Fahrenheit. And it gets up to like over 100 degrees. I don't know. Maybe 110 at the cap. I'm guessing it's probably like 105 generally. But it's ridiculous. And it's hot right here. So I'm reading this book, and I'm reading this book by Steven Pinker, and it's called The Sense of Style. I would definitely, if you want to be better at writing, I would definitely suggest reading it because he's a cognitive scientist, and he tries to approach it from that perspective. I think he also deals with a lot of linguistics, and this isn't part of the accidental essence, but I've been thinking about stuff, and I just want to share it right now. And maybe I'll have a bigger podcast episode about it, but now that I've told you, you know that I'll be stealing everything from him. So, he's a cognitive scientist. So he goes through how language works in a very, very clear way. So if you are someone who, if you can read, if you're an adult and you can read, or even if you're a teenager, you might not find the book interesting if you're a teenager. But if you're an adult and you can read, I would highly suggest just picking it up from the library and reading it. It's a really interesting book from my perspective. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing that you'll also like this book, and I'm going to probably share some stuff. But what he talks about is this. He talks about how the human brain works, and I want to talk more about it than just this. Maybe if I go 30 minutes just talking about this, I'll have this as the episode. But he talks about this idea of how the human brain works. So if you've taken Intro to Psychology, you know, or you've heard this idea that there's the working memory. So anything you talk, or most things you talk about in psychology are theoretical, okay? And right now, I believe this is something that we're seeing something in someone. We're calling it something, but it's what it's called is working memory. That's what it's called right now. And what it is that a person has this memory they have. So what they have, you have memory. You have let's talk about the brain a little bit. Your brain is made up of neurons, and the pathways of the neurons are your memories. Okay, let's just put it like that way. So the pathways of the neurons are your memories. And when you are thinking, your neurons are firing in certain pathways, and it's connecting to other memories. Okay? Now, there's the unconscious memory. Let's just call it that. I don't know if it's called that. Maybe there is something and I'm mixing it up. But you have memory that you don't always remember. And then you remember something, and then it triggers that memory, and so on and so forth. So when you're trying to memorize something, for those of you who haven't taken like Intro to Psychology, which maybe there's someone who hasn't, and if you haven't, then here's some information for you. So when you're trying to memorize something, there was a guy, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry. There's probably someone out there who does. I'm sure there is. I don't know. I think it's like Ebbinghaus. I don't know if it's Ebbinghaus or somebody else. There's a lot of psychologists, whatever. And he found out that when you try to memorize lists, you can keep about 5 to 7. It's like 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information in your mind. And think of information, these pieces of information, as letters, okay? So you can think of this information as letters. So A is a bit, that's what they call it, I'm pretty sure. It's been a while, okay? I have a psych degree, but it's been a while. A is a bit, B is a bit, so on and so forth. So if you string random letters together, generally people can remember 7 plus or minus, and that's, so it's 5 or 9 or somewhere in there. It's about that amount, and they can keep that in their memory, and they can hold on to it. But if you get any longer than that, I might just do this for the episode. If you get any longer than that, then people start to forget because they just can't hold it in their memory, in their working memory. Okay, and I've got a friend. That guy's probably got to be able to do like 30 bits of information in his mind. So like, I have a psych degree. Just a little bit of what's it called? I'm revealing a little bit about myself. I can't remember what that's called. I have a psych degree, and I had to do studies in for my degree. I had to actually conduct a study. I think it's really good. Side note, I think it's really valuable to actually have to go through the process of conducting a study, especially a social science study, because it makes you realize what it takes, and it makes you realize that it's harder than it looks, and it's really, really hard to isolate things in a study like that. So you're trying to control for everything but the thing you're testing, right? It's like any other study. And if you're a biologist, or if you're like someone who deals with rocks, it's a lot easier. But if you're a psychologist, you've got to think really if you're a good psychologist, you've got to think creatively, because I think there's a lot of people who are maybe getting these degrees, and they're doing, I don't know, I'm not in the psychological research right now, but they're getting these degrees, and they maybe aren't controlling for all these variables, or they're coming to bad conclusions because they've got the average and not the actual person, if you know what I mean by that. I hope you do. So the average is just the aggregate. Is that the word for it? I'm just making stuff up now. You're just putting it all together, and you're adding all the numbers, you're dividing, and you're finding this number that kind of represents the whole of people, even though there's tons of human variability. So studying people is really hard. But this guy found out you could actually you could only hold 7 plus or minus 2. Back to my story. Sorry. So this is what I was saying. So I had a study. After I said that, I'm sorry if I lost my train of thought. This is what happens when I don't have just bullet points to follow, because I just lose my train of thought. And bullet points really help for me. See, I'm already losing my train of thought. I think maybe being a writer is a good thing for me, because that's pretty much losing your train of thought for 100,000 words. But I had to do a study, and I had people memorizing lists and listening to music. I don't remember. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was something else. And my friend memorized every single stinking thing. It was unbelievable. But that connects back to what we're talking about. So that isn't actually a bad story to tell. So Steven Pinker, that's the guy's name. The book is The Sense of Style, all right? And the subtitle, A Thinking Person's Guide to Writing in the 21st Century. He's a cognitive scientist, but it's extremely readable because he's taking his own advice. But he talks about this idea how someone who how you memorize so much information. So the question is, like, we only can memorize 7 plus or minus 2, or maybe even less. Maybe it's like 4 bits of information, 4 letters, let's just call it that. Now, if you know psychology, you know where I'm going with this, but maybe you don't know how far I'm going with this. Or if you've read the book, you know where I'm going with this. But who reads writing books? Come on, let's be real. Writing isn't interesting. Why are you even here? Hi, Mom. Okay, so you can memorize that amount, and but when you think about stuff, when you talk about to people, you have all these different ideas and all this different information you can pull from, and you can bring into your mind. You have conversations with people. So the question is, how does that work? And that's what I'm going to tell you right now. So you can memorize 7 plus or minus 7 plus about 7 bits of information. Like I've said, pieces of information. Think of it as a letter. Now, what you do, and you know where I'm going with this. Like I said, if you have read anything in psychology, if you take in psychology 101, but if you're like in high school, you haven't taken psychology 101, what you do is you chunk things, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Okay, so think of a string of letters. Now you just have random letters, and you can memorize about 7 of those. You can keep them in your mind, and you keep them running through your mind. Okay, and what you do I can memorize more letters than you if you don't know how this works. What it is instead of having random letters, I suddenly have things like CIA, FBI, UPS, FedEx. I suddenly have words, right? And words are kind of like their own separate entity. Words actually, when you chunk something, the chunk only takes up one piece in your memory, one slot, as it were, in your memory. Okay? And you might wonder, well, what's like if I chunk things, eventually I'm going to run out of the ability to chunk things, but it's actually not the case. You can keep on chunking things until you have these huge what do you call it? Chunks of information, I guess. Man, I'm just running out of words right now. So I was recording. I recorded part of this, and it shut off on me again. So I actually had all this stuff to say, and I was probably at like 20 minutes, and just it's gone. But if you're someone who likes history, if you're someone who likes science, so let's talk about science. Now I'm going to tell you a chunk that is in science. It's called the scientific method. And if you've done any studying, if you know science at all, or if you're familiar with science, you can probably name off the steps of the scientific method. You could probably talk about it at a great length. You could probably talk about what it is, how it works, the different ways to do it. You could probably start talking about controls and how to control for different variables and so on and so forth. And science is one big chunk, and what's happened, what you've done is you've taken smaller chunks, smaller pieces, and you put them under the umbrella of science. So it's one big chunk, and when you bring up science, you can recall different things. So we're going to take a little side, whatever, I don't need to really say that. So there's this guy, and you might have heard of him. His name is Daniel Tammet. He's from England. I think he's from England, or somewhere over there. He's from one of those islands that's above France. And he has an issue with his brain called synesthesia. It's pretty popular. People know what it is. He wrote a book. Side note, he wrote a book called Born on a Blue Day. It's about him growing up, and he has autism. I think he has Asperger's. I'm not sure if it's Asperger's or full-blown autism. They're both the same thing now. They're all on the spectrum, but it used to be Asperger's. But he has I can't say the word, okay? Okay, I can't say the word. Synesthesia. It's hard. I never had trouble with S's as a kid. And what synesthesia is when you say something, when your senses mix. Okay, that's what it is. So, for example, someone who has synesthesia, oh man, I'm going to have to say that so much, might see different, it's hard to describe. So I'll just describe what happens with him. When he experiences numbers, he actually sees a shape, and he sees specific colors associated with that shape. So one thing he was able to do is he was able to memorize pretty much an extreme. So pi is never ending. The number pi is never ending. He was able to memorize an extreme amount of digits past pi. And the reason he was able to do that is because he saw the numbers. He experienced them as a string of numbers, and he experienced them also as a specific shape with a specific color. It's had its own shape to it. And so I'm trying to bring it back to us. I'm having a little hard time because I was just going and going, and I was having a great time talking, and I got cut off. It was like at the 12-minute mark of this. And you probably can figure it out if you go back, but don't. But what this is and what this does is think of your brain as a computer. Okay, that's probably the best analog we have. The computer is more like a brain than the brain is like a computer. All right, the brain came first. I think that we should say the computer is like a brain rather than the brain being like a computer. But we can understand a computer. It's a physical thing. People have created it, so we understand it more than we understand the human brain. That's generally the case when you make something. So let's just say that you're trying to store the image of a phone in your brain. Think of it like a computer. Now, imagine that in your brain, instead of, you can't see words, right? You can't crack open a brain and you can't suddenly be like, oh, here's a word and here's a word. There isn't a voice talking in your brain if you cut it open, all right? There's a voice connected to your brain. There's a voice maybe coming from your brain that's going through your mouth, I guess, if you want to talk like that. But there isn't a voice in your brain. You can't see it when you cut open a brain. You can't look under a microscope and see the words. You can't look under the microscope and see thought. Now, you do experience thought. So if I see an image of a phone, I'm looking at a phone right now, so I'm using an image of a phone right now because it's on my mind. If I see an image of a phone, I need to remember what a phone is, okay? So if the brain worked like a computer, your brain would need to encode what that phone is into the brain. If it was a computer, it would be a string of code. With the brain, it is your neurons. Now, I believe it's more along the lines of the pathways, the neuron pathways. I don't think it's the neurons themselves that store the memory. I think that theory right now holds that it's actually the pathways. I don't know. I think it's the pathways instead of just the neurons individually. So that image of the phone is stored in your brain, and then if you want to think of a phone, you can bring that out, okay? So when that comes out, your neurons fire, and then you're able to recall that from your memory. Now, why is this important? For Daniel Tammet, the guy with synesthesia, when you encode a phone, you only have the image of the phone to encode it. When you are talking about that bit of information for you or me, if you have synesthesia, this is different. But when you're talking about that piece of information for most people, like 99 point however many nines of the population, you encode just a string of numbers. You're encoding one thing into your brain. Now, for him, he's encoding multiple different things into his brain. All right? He's got the string of numbers. He's also got a shape. And he's got colors to go with the shape. What this does is there's more than one connection. So there's different areas of your brain that deal with different types of things. There's different areas of your brain that kind of encode verbal sounds. There's different areas of your brain that encode sight sounds. There's different areas of your brain that probably encode colors that are associated with sight. Like I'm sure there's subsections that deal with that. So when he recalls something, it's connecting to all of these things. This does connect back to chunking, okay? So let's talk about the scientific method. And I'm thinking about Freud in relation to the scientific method, and I'm actually thinking about the fact that Freud really didn't do any science. He just pretty much theorized things. And I'm pretty sure Jung only theorized things too. And Jung's archetypes are pretty interesting, aren't they? I'm thinking about the thief archetype. I'm not even sure the thief is an archetype. Speaking of that, I have this idea for a game, like a board game, where it's based off of a story. Don't steal my idea. And it's kind of like a card game, so you'd have something similar to Bang if you've ever played Bang. And if you've ever played Bang, the interesting thing about Bang is when you shoot at somebody, this is a card game if you're not aware of that. Speaking of cards, people don't play cards too often, do they? So I was just bringing that up seemingly randomly. Seemingly randomly is really annoying to say. But it wasn't random. It's because each of the things were connected. All right, does that make sense? So you have these bits of information and you're putting them together and you're chunking them. You're making them into huge, think about it like a house. All right, there's all these different pieces of information. And if you know a lot about something, about a specific topic, you build this house of that specific topic. And when you're thinking about that thing, there's all these different areas that connect back to that topic. They bounce around. It's like, oh, I'm going to talk about science. And then suddenly there's all these firings in your brain. We're talking about it on a brain level. And then suddenly you can recall all these different things about science. Daniel Tammet, the guy who has synesthesia, he encoded numbers as colors and shapes, so there were more firings going on in his brain. There were more pathways at work, and he was able to recall it better because there was so much more stuff connected to it. Okay, and I'm getting back to the book I was talking about at the beginning. Don't worry, but I think it's important to know about this because it's valuable when you're thinking about it. Okay, so when you think about something you know really, really well, it's similar to what he's doing with his brain. He could memorize numbers of pi. Most people can't remember that long string of numbers, huge string of numbers. I'd have to look up how long it was. But they can remember stories. They can remember things they really, really enjoy. Okay, they probably can go on about things they really enjoy a lot because first, they think about it a lot. Repetition is the mother of all learning. Shoot me in the head. And that's what my English teacher in freshman year in high school said all the time. It's true to a certain degree, but it's also what's the grandfather of learning is you building the house, right? It's you making that construct in your mind and connecting things to it. So when you think about science, if you're a scientist, you know a lot more than me, first of all, but you have all this information connected to it. Think of it like a tree, think of it like a house, think about whatever you'd like. It's like a spider web of information in your brain, okay? And what Steven Pinker talks about in his book is how when you chunk something, so if you have someone who's a philosopher, and I was talking to a friend about writing recently, and he was talking about how a philosopher was a really bad writer, and this explains it. So if you're listening, this is why. This is why you can't write worth a darn. Worth a crap, come on. Okay, so when you get really good at something, you have these huge chunks of information, and you don't need to deal with the individual parts that make up that chunk. And when you start to do that, you start to think of the use of the thing, all right? And you can't break it down to what the thing is. You can't break it down to these individual small parts because you probably could if you thought about it, right? But you haven't thought about it in that way so long. First of all, your language is completely different than another person's. You're so specialized. And second of all, you don't even deal with what the other person deals with. If you think of it like tiers, if you think of it like steps, someone who's a beginner is on the first step, maybe they're not even on the steps at all. Someone who's a beginner is maybe on the first step, maybe the second. Someone who is an expert at it is at the top of the steps, and it's 50 steps long. It's a huge, huge staircase. And what that person who is at the top, that person at the top can't suddenly spout out what they're talking about to the person at the bottom. They need to step back down. They need to actually work backwards in their mind to be able to talk to the person at the bottom. So what Steven Pinker talks about in his book, The Sense of Style, I'll say it again because you might as well look at it. It's interesting. It's really, really well written. I'll say that, is that when you write, you need to take steps back. So he wrote the book for people in nonfiction, like to write nonfiction books, so people, the layperson, could understand. So you need to break that thing down. You need to make it concrete so that someone can understand it, right? That's why instead of just saying psychological constructs, I have the image of the house when I was talking to you. Because maybe there's someone who isn't as versed in that as I am. And the reason why people have such a hard time stepping backward, going down that staircase to the bottom row or wherever that person is because they think that person knows more than they actually do. There's a, what's the term? I can't remember. It's like an egocentrism. You think other people know as much as you do, but it's actually not the case. It's like you don't empathize with people as well. Speaking of empathy and speaking of networks in your brain, there's studies that show that if you read classic novels, it actually helps you with empathizing with other people. So when you write, this all connects back to writing. When you write, you try to make it as clear as possible. You try to put it in concrete terms that people actually run into in their lives. If I suddenly talk about things in relation to psychology, or even what if I talk to someone who doesn't know what psychology is, right? Maybe there's someone listening who's like, what is psychology? Well, psychology is just the study essentially of how people work. That's really, really simple. The simplest probably you can say it. So look at a person. Why do they do what they do? How do their brains work? Why do their brains work that way? How do they function in the world? And that crosses over into different areas, but that's essentially what it is. So what you're trying to do as an author is you're trying to step backward. You're trying to break down those chunks. So for someone who is a fiction author, if you want to write fiction or whatever you want to write, if you want to write fiction, using this advice from Pinker, You look at the whole world that you've created. A lot of people have built these huge constructs, this house of what you've created, and you need to break it down. You need to write it in a way where people can understand it. You need to make it concrete, right? You need to write it in a concrete way so people can touch and feel it. And you need to write in a way that has enough information for people to actually do that. Not too much information, not so much that they die because you're just flooding them with it, but enough that they can picture what's going on. Right, you're taking them out of you're taking a person who's not versed in what you're talking about at all, and you're putting them into a new world, right? And some people don't like Tolkien because they think he just dumps information on people, but I think that he's someone who's done this really well. First of all, he's writing to the English people. I think his audience was England. I think his audience was his culture. His audience wasn't even necessarily the United States culture. I think it was the English culture. And he had enough connections to the English culture that he could bridge the gap, and he could be like, okay, we smoke in England, we drink, we do these things. I'm going to bring English culture into this fantasy novel. I'm going to bring ancient English culture, these stories we've heard, into this fantasy novel. And then people are going to understand it better. I don't think he was consciously doing that, but that's what he did. So that's how he bridged the gap. So whoever you're writing for, first make it simple. Don't act like they're idiots, but think, well, what do these people actually know? What are common things I can connect to my writing to? What's something that people can hold on to, as it were? What's something concrete that people can grab? If you don't know what concrete is, it's something just physical, right? That's for someone who doesn't know what concrete is. Bringing my words down to the level of someone who might not know that. Something you can grab onto, something you can see with your eyes, actually feel, something people actually experience, and that's going to make people just understand what you're talking about so much more. Essentially what you're trying to do is you're seeing a picture in your mind. You're trying to take that construct, that picture in your mind, and it might be a huge one. For me, I have books upon books that are in my mind that need to be transferred onto a page, and I've just got to hold it there for now. But I'm trying to take that in my mind, and I'm trying to put like little pieces at a time onto the page. One other thing he talks. Well, I'm not going to get into that now. Maybe another time. Maybe I'll write up something about that. So that's what I'll leave you with. So that's some ideas from his sense of style. I hope it's useful. When you think about chunking as well, when you think about remembering things as well, here's something. Maybe we really like stories. Maybe stories are one of the best ways to teach someone because they are a big, huge chunk, right? If I talk to someone about Lord of the Rings, for example, I guess someone's going to remember more about that story than if I talk to them about something they were learning in school, because it's presented as this huge chunk. And maybe that's how we should teach people. So we shouldn't try to teach them isolated facts about something. We shouldn't try to teach them isolated skills or anything like that. We should try to teach it within a construct, within a house we're building. Okay. And I just lost my never mind. So I've got a logical fallacy of the week. A non sequitur. A non sequitur means it does not follow in Latin, if you didn't realize that was Latin. So what it means is the conclusion does not follow the premises, okay? A premise is just a statement, and then you're making a conclusion based off that statement. So an example of a non sequitur is, if you love me, you'd buy me this car. There's the premise, if you love me, you buy me this car. If you love me, therefore you will buy me this car, right? But it doesn't follow. Just because you love someone does not mean you're going to buy them a car, right? Now, if they need a car and you love them, you might buy them a car. Or if you love me, well, I guess I won't say that one. Never mind. But you could say that if you like a specific book, if you like a specific author, you've got to like this book by them. So, for example, if you like J.R.R. Tolkien, give me a break. You've got to like The Hobbit, right? But you might not like The Hobbit, but you still might like him. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't follow that someone would like something just because of that. Anything that doesn't necessarily follow is a non sequitur. You might hear that a lot. And I just want to tell you what it is, just in case you hear it. I think I hear it at a lot of political things. I'm not talking well right now. I don't know what I was going to say. I'm sorry. I just lost my train. It was just gone. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me. I had a whole different idea that I was going to do for this podcast, but I started reading this book and I just like it. So hopefully you'll enjoy this as well. And I guess I'm Dan Poppie, and I'll see you next week. I don't know. This is How to Write Good.